Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, welcome and thanks for finding us. I hope you like this video. I hope you like Hong Kong cinema. I hope you like Blu-rays. I hope you like movie reviews and all the other stuff that I'm going to be talking about. If you're not subscribed and you could subscribe, that would be hugely appreciated. Thank you so much for that. I want to give a big shout out to our patrons because the movie I'm going to be talking about today, which is Mr. Vampire, hell yes, this is the Eureka release, which I have right here. I bought this with Patreon money. So after the sequels came out, and I loved Mr. Vampire 2, Mr. Vampire 3, and it became public knowledge that I had never seen the first one. Everyone was like, what are you doing with your life? Go and get the Eureka release and watch that movie and then review it. And I'm like, you know what? I probably should. So I spent some Patreon money and I picked up Mr. Vampire from Eureka, and I'm really happy I did. I loved the crap out of this movie. I have so much to say about it. So this might be a little bit of a longer video, but this is going to be a Patreon Wicked early release video because I did buy this release with Patreon money. So I'm thinking like Halloween would be about a good time to put this out on YouTube. It is the beginning of August right now as I'm reviewing this. So in about 2.5 months, I will throw this one up on YouTube, but it's going to live in Patreon as a Wicked early release for that interim period there. So this movie came out in 1985. It ran from, I think, November 7th until December 4th of 1985. So it was in theaters for like a month, which was, not too shabby in the mid-1980s. And it made about 20 million, I think, Hong Kong dollars at the box office, directed by Ricky Lau, who directed a lot of the sequels. It was written by Barry Wong and Zeto Chuk Hon, and it was produced by Sammo Hung, very famously. Sammo was involved in so many of these very innovative, really culturally, historically important Hong Kong like hybrid horror comedy movies at that time, like The Dead and the Deadly and Encounter of the Spooky Kind and Mr. Vampire. And like he was really like we talk a lot about Sammo being a huge pioneer of action comedy and the importance of him as a martial arts filmmaker, especially after Bruce Lee passed away, and kind of like filling that void to a degree, laying the groundwork for Jackie Chan in some ways and all that kind of stuff. But he was really like as an actor, as a producer, as a director, as a writer, a pioneer in Hong Kong horror comedy. And like generally speaking, I would argue 80s horror comedy, kind of more broadly speaking. Let me show you I love the reversible artwork here. I came really close to reversing it. This is just like the old school Hong Kong poster, which I just think is so cool. There's a great cast in this movie. Lam Ching-ying, obviously, and Ricky Hui and Sui-ho, who is fantastic in this movie, and Moon Lee is so good. It's like Moon Lee, like, I'm so used to thinking of Moon Lee as the Girls with Guns movie, Moon Lee, who just kicks the shit out of everyone and is like one of the best action stars ever. And I love her action movies, but she's a really diverse actor. And she does like, she does like comedy in Mr. Vampire 2 and even in Devil Hunters, like is it Devil Hunters or Iron Angels, where she does like some comedy stuff, and she's very good at comedy. She's obviously very easy to look at. So she like in this movie, she kind of plays like, I know I use this reference point a lot, but it's like such an easy reference point, I think, for 80s Hong Kong cinema. She plays like the Maggie Chung Police Story type of character, where she's like young and attractive and she's not doing too much, and she's basically kind of like a damsel in distress, and all the men are like drooling over her because she's so attractive, and like, but she's also like the cute, friendly girl next door type of like male fantasy type of character. Like it's kind of who she plays in this movie. If you're unfamiliar with the plot of this film, Lam Ching-ying is this like Taoist priest guy, and he's got these two apprentices who are Ricky Hui and Sui-ho, and they're asked to dig up this guy's grave. It's this rich guy, and Moon Lee is his daughter, and obviously the two young guys are like, they have crushes on Moon Lee, and they're trying to like flirt with her and stuff like that. And the Lam Ching-ying character is asked to dig up the grave of this character because they were told by a feng shui expert that his grave had to be dug up after 20 years and moved because of some conflict he had in life with this is like kind of backstory thing. If he had like a conflict with this other guy, and so his grave was cursed or something like that, and it's going to curse the future of his family if they don't dig it up and move it. And he ends up that they dig this corpse up and it becomes a vampire, and then he creates another vampire. So you have these two vampires running around, and then while they're in the process of doing all this Taoist stuff, they accidentally awaken this ghost too. And so the ghost, it's like one of the amorous ghosts who like falls in love with a young man and tries to drain all his sexual energy. So you have that kind of like subplot too. One of the things that's so good about this movie. Oh, and I should also tell you that Pauline Wong plays the ghost. She's fantastic in this movie. Billy Lau is in this movie, who's in Mr. Vampire 2. Yun Hua plays one of the vampires. Yun Biu is in this movie. Wu Ma. So like a lot of faces that you'll recognize. But this movie is so good in the way that it sets up the world, because through the intelligence of the world building details, it gives itself so much license to explore so many things. And this movie really does have everything. Like, it has action, it has romance, it has comedy, it has hot young people doing hot young people stuff, which we can all agree is one of the reasons people like watching movies. And it's just got everything. It's got really good fight scenes. I am a big sucker for people being thrown through wood in fight scenes. I know that's like a weird thing, but like breaking banisters, breaking tables, breaking wooden buckets, just like stuff being smashed and people being thrown through stuff and breaking it. I love it. And it happens a lot in this movie, and it's very satisfying for me. But the setup of the movie is so smart for so many reasons. I'll give you some examples of this. There's a lot of devices they use that are within like the Taoist mythology of the film that give you tension within scenes. So I'll tell you two of them. One is the talismans, right? So you have these yellow pieces of paper and they write on them in this red ink, and then they put them on the heads of the vampires or the ghosts or whatever, and it stops them, right? And like puts them back to sleep kind of. So you have this built-in device of like, okay, there's a vampire on the loose. We know what the goal is. And the Taoist stuff in the movie gives you so many goals within scenes. So the characters are never just running around being like, oh crap, it's a vampire, what do we do? They're like, okay, it's a vampire and it's doing this. So we need this type of talisman, and I need like the chicken blood, and I need the ink, and I need the, like the special rope, and I need the sword made out of coins, or I need the peachwood sword. Like, there's all these pieces of the mythology that they have to call upon in certain circumstances that creates tension and goals and action within the scene. So you're never just like wandering around being unsure what's going to happen next or what someone has to do, because the mythology of the film lays out very clear rules for the goals these people have to achieve within these scenes in order to stop the vampire or the ghost or whatever. Like the scene with the ghost, they have to get like the moonlight through the mirror on the sword of the coins and like all this kind of stuff. And it builds tension because you're hoping they're able to do it, but the vampire might stop them, or the vampire might leap away before they can finish it, or the ghost might call upon some of its own magic. Like, one of the setups with the ghost that's so cool is the ghost can make people see things. So the Lam Ching-yin character is trying to fight this ghost in one scene, and the Chin Sui-ho character, his apprentice, is there, and he's in love with the ghost, and it's kind of like bewitched him, and the ghost is making him see stuff that's not real. So he's fighting the Lam Ching-yin character. There's so much potential for all of these like cool magical devices that give you like surrealism and altered perspectives and like weird perceptions. And like there's the scene where one of the ghosts kind of appears in the film is this very surreal, weird scene where these people with like painted faces are kind of like floating through the forest. And like the tone of this movie is so good because it moves between like serious good, like of all the Hong Kong horror movies I've seen, this is the one with the tone that most reminds me of like a creature feature from the US or like a Universal monster movie. Like you have like creepy scenes of like monster POV, and like a lot of it takes place at night. And like there's one scene where like a vampire is trying to get out of a coffin, and its creepy hands with its long fingers are coming out. And it reminds me of like Dracula or like Nosferatu. And like it does have this very cool creature feature type of ambiance. And it has this kind of, it's an 80s film. It has kind of an, John Carpenter-esque like 80s horror type of ambiance. But it's got really good character stuff, really good romance, and a lot of comedy in it. And one of the ways that the craft aspects of this film are so well done. Excuse me. And one of the ways that it moves between all these different tones is through the use of the music. So like a musical cue will kind of, you'll have a scene of comedy and then, there'll be this kind of denouement to the scene and then you'll have this ominous violin start playing and that'll lead you into like a more serious ghost scene or vampire scene or something like that. And it's just the craft aspects of the film, the storytelling scene to scene, structurally speaking as a film, like, you have the ghost and you have the vampires and it sets up more than your typical number of characters. Now, this is typical of Sammo Hung, but it's not typical of most filmmakers in this era. Sammo Hung, who produced this film, remember, and his screenwriters who he regularly worked with and the directors he worked with and stuff, they tended to populate films with more characters than you would usually get. In a very traditional film of this nature, you would get one Sifu character, one apprentice character, and maybe one romantic interest. In this movie, you have two pupils. Right away, that gives you more to play with because each one of them can have a storyline. They have relationships with one another and they have relationships with the Sifu. So you get these character triangles that allows all these different bits of like tension and comedy and shifting relationships and camaraderie. Camaraderie is a huge thing that attracts audiences to films because you want, like, look at the Fast and Furious movies. Why are there like fucking 1,000 of those movies? Because you like those characters and you like the camaraderie between them and their shifting relationships with one another within the series of the films. A movie like Lethal Weapon is like that too. Why do we love that movie? Because we love the characters and their relationships with one another and the fact that it's not really just one cop. You have two cops. One of the cops has a family. They have a boss who's in all the movies. Then one of them falls in love and that brings someone else into it. And the Joe Pesci character shows up and then the Chris Rock character shows up and like it's just this constantly expanding world of these characters. And Sammo Hung and his screenwriters and his directors are very smart in including large groups of characters. So you have the Lam Ching Ying character, his two apprentices, you have the Moon Lee character, who's the romantic interest for them, until one of them falls in love with the ghost. That gives him a separate romantic interest and a separate storyline, but that ties back into the main storyline. And one of the things that works so well in this film is the way that the problems complicate one another and they compound one another so that it's not this compartmentalized thing of like, let's deal with the ghost and now let's deal with the vampire. You have this section towards the end of the film where like the Ricky Hui character has been attacked by a vampire and is starting to turn into a vampire as the ghost shows up to get the Chin Sui-ho character. So Lam Ching Ying is trying to fight off the ghost and he's got Chin Sui-ho tied to a chair because he's bewitched by the ghost, but the Ricky Hui character is turning into a vampire and Chin Sui-ho can't escape because he's tied to the chair. And so the different storylines in the film complicate one another. And they pile these complications on top of one another to create more tension and engagement for the audience. So it's just very, very intelligent filmmaking, which is one of the things I loved about this movie. And I mean, this is just such a cool era in the history of genre cinema, especially horror and sci-fi and creature features and stuff of that nature. There was a lot of innovative thinking going on. People were taking all types of mythology and traditional beliefs and supernatural things and stuff like that and kind of combining them with modern sensibilities. Then you had the kind of dawning of special effects in that you could do things you couldn't have done before with the use of like computers and stuff like that. There's a little bit of that in this movie, but also this was the golden era for practical effects. And because it was a golden era for practical effects, you had a lot of creative and innovative thinking with the practical effects. And you get some really cool creature stuff. Like the vampires in this are really cool and they each have their own unique look. There's a scene in this movie where with the ghost where Lam Ching Ying like bewitches his own eyes so he can see the ghost as she really is, not how she's projecting herself. And she's got like this, her face is like all gnarly and there's this like really gross makeup effect and like, and that was such a big part of movies at that time. And it's just, it's this really tremendous sense of innovation within the narrative kind of template and the way that genres are being spliced together, but also a really great visual imagination and visual wit that's just really appealing and unique and of this era. There's some really great use of the camera in this film. There's this really fun little like cat and mouse thing towards the end where Lam Ching Ying and Chin Sui-ho are like chasing down the vampire and they go into this house and the camera kind of pulls back and you see that the vampire is on the roof. And then we cut into the roof of the building the vampire is walking across and the Billy Lau character and the Ricky Hui character and the Moon Lee character are in there. and they're looking around for the vampire. It like comes through a skylight and it walks one way and they walk the other way. And it's just like, it's almost like, you know, like a Buster Keaton or whatever, like old school kind of silent comedy type of thing. But it's just like, just constant, innovative, interesting ways of telling this story that are, it's just so well done. There's one other scene that I wanted to mention that I thought was just really, really well made, or really well done in terms of the craft elements. There's when we first meet the Moon Lee character, the Lam Ching Ying character is taking the Ricky Hui character to like a tea house, but it's like a Western style tea house. So the Ricky Hui character is like, he's all nervous because he's like, I've never had like Western tea before. Like, what if it's gross? I don't know what to do. And Lam Ching Ying's like, shut up and drink the tea. Because they're going to meet this guy who wants them to move. He wants them to move his dad's grave, right? So they're going to have like this practical conversation. So it's a scene that is moving the story forward in a practical way because it's setting up the plot. It's also setting up character because, like I said, we first meet the Moon Lee character in this scene. So they go to this restaurant and they have this menu and they don't know what to order. And the Lam Ching Ying character, even though he seemed like totally relaxed about it, he's nervous too because he like doesn't recognize the menu and it's in like English and he doesn't know what to order. And they end up getting coffee and they bring the coffee and the milk and the sugar. And all of this is happening while they're talking about other stuff. And then they're, you know, Ricky Hui and Lam Ching Ying are looking at like the coffee and the milk and the sugar, and they're like, what do we do with this? And like, is it different drinks or are we supposed to combine them? Like, what's happening right now? And it's funny. It creates tension within the scene and it creates little comedic hijinks because Moon Lee, like, she notices what they're doing and she knows how to drink coffee because she's more sophisticated than them because she's gone and had been educated in the capital and stuff like that. And so she's kind of like making fun of them. So there's like tension and humor within the scene. But the subtext of the scene is, and this is what's so smart about this movie takes place in China, right? But this movie is for a Hong Kong audience. So what this movie has to do is create relatable circumstances for Hong Kong audiences in the 1980s while telling this kind of traditional Chinese story. And what it's doing is it's creating this tension between traditional Chinese culture of Lam Ching Ying is this like Taoist priest who doesn't know how to drink coffee, and this, you know, menu that's in English, and they're drinking coffee with milk. It's this foreign thing that is being introduced into China, and there's tension between these elements of the modernizing world and foreign influence and culture coming in and changing the way that society works, while you cannot take the traditional Chinese culture out of China, right? So think about Hong Kong, which is a British colony, right? That would have a lot of these British tea houses where people are drinking coffee with milk and stuff like that. In the 1980s, you have this condition of, you know, modernity and like the, you know, the modern urban world, and you have the British culture and the traditional Chinese culture coexisting with this kind of tension between them. And that, in a nutshell, is Hong Kong for the audience. And so they're giving you this little comedy routine that is creating a recognizable, meaningful cultural experience for the audience that helps them understand the world of the movie, which is this clash between this rapidly modernizing world where people are maybe a little bit cynical or not really inclined to believe in vampires, and the world is changing a lot, but these traditional Taoist beliefs and stuff like that are still kind of at the core of everything that's going on, and they have to be employed in order to combat like the vampires and the ghosts and stuff like that. And just the way that the Taoism is integrated throughout the movie, and the way that we see the changing face of culture at that time, where like the ghost lives in this more traditional Chinese house that you might see in like a Shaw Brothers type of movie. But, you know, like the rich guy whose dad they're digging up, he lives in this big Western style house where they sit at Western style tables and wear Western style clothing. And like the Moon Lee character is wearing this very kind of like Victorian era British looking dress at one point, but then we see her in more traditional Chinese clothing like later in the film. It's just really well done. There's a lot of really funny comedy in the scene. My favorite comedy routine was when the Sui-ho character first meets the Moon Lee character, and he works in this shop where they sell like makeup and stuff. And his aunt, who owns the shop, tells him, "Oh, there's a prostitute coming in today, so just don't be mean to her just because she's a prostitute. Like, let her buy her stuff." And then the Moon Lee character comes in, and he thinks that she's the prostitute, and she set up with her characters that she has studied like makeup. She went and studied cosmetics in the capital. So she's like putting makeup on herself, and he thinks she's a prostitute. So he's like asking her about her job. And she's like, "Oh, my mom taught me how to do it when I was 12." And he's like, "What?" Because he thinks she's saying, "My mom taught me how to be a hooker when I was 12." It's really funny. This release looks incredible. It's got like that classic, amazing, like Hong Kong blue, smoky 80s look, but then like the daytime scenes and the sets and like it just looks stunning. Like there were several scenes where I was watching this movie where I'm like, God, it just looks so good. I'm just looking at my notes here to see. It's a really good monster movie with like good gross out kind of effects and like it's a good 80s Hong Kong film. It's a funny movie. It's a very Sammo film. It's got great characters and great character relationships. It's got a lot of kind of plot complications and you never kind of get bored with where it's going because it's a very innovative film. I just love the shit out of this movie and it's like so obvious just upon my first viewing why it's a classic film and why it was such an important cultural historical landmark kind of in Hong Kong popular culture. And I'm sure the more times I watch this, the more I'll see in it. The movie is Mr. Vampire. Huge shout out to my patrons for contributing to the channel, for allowing me to buy this release and many releases like this. My name is Will. You are watching Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. If you are watching this on YouTube and I'm putting it up in October, happy Halloween. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Halloween movies to watch are, especially your favorite Hong Kong Halloween movies. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.